To each what she produces. The first plan, that of giving to every person exactly what he or she has made by his or her labor, seems fair. But when we try to put it into practice, we discover, first, that it is quite impossible to find out how much each person has produced, and second, that a great deal of world's work is neither producing material things nor altering the things that nature produces, but doing services of one sort or another. When a farmer and his laborers sow and reap a field of wheat, nobody on earth can say how much of the wheat each of them has grown. When a machine in a factory turns out pins by the million, nobody can say how many pins are due to the labor of the person who mines the machine, or the person who invented it, or the engineers who made it, to say nothing of all the other persons employed about the factory. The clearest case in the world of a person producing something herself by her own painful, prolonged, and risky labor is that of a woman who produces a baby. But then she cannot live on the baby. The baby lives greedily on her. Robinson Crusoe on his desert island could have claimed that the boats and shelters and fences he made with the materials supplied by nature belonged to him, because they were the fruit of nobody's labor but his own. But when he returned to civilization, he could not have laid his hand on a chair or table in his house which was not the work of dozens of men. Foresters who had planted the trees, woodmen who had felled them, lumbermen and bargemen and sailors and porters who had moved them, sawyers who had sewn them into planks and scantlings, upholsterers and joiners who had fashioned them into tables and chairs, not to mention the merchants who had conducted all the business involved in these transactions, and the makers of the shops and ships and all the rest of it. Anyone who thinks about it for a few minutes must see that trying to divide up by giving each worker exactly what she or he has produced is like trying to give every drop of rain in a heavy shower exactly the quantity of water it adds to the supply in your cistern. It just cannot be done. What can be done is to pay every person according to the time she or he spends at the work. Time is something that can be measured in figures. It is quite easy to pay a worker twice as much for 2 hours' work as for one. There are people who will work for sixpence an hour, people who will work for 18 pence an hour, people who will work for 2 guineas an hour, people who will work for 150 guineas an hour. These prices depend on how many competitors there are in the trade looking for the work, and whether the people who want it done are rich or poor. You pay a seamstress a shilling to sew for an hour, or a laborer to chop wood, when there are plenty of unemployed seamstresses and laborers starving for a job, each of them trying to induce you to give it to her or him rather than to the next applicant by offering to do it at a price that'll barely keep body and soul together. You pay a popular actress 200 or 300 pounds a week, or a famous opera singer as much a night, because the public will pay more than that to hear her. You pay a famous surgeon 150 guineas to cut out your appendix, or a famous barrister the same to plead for you, because there are so few famous surgeons or barristers, and so many patients and clients offering them large sums to work for them rather than for you. This is called settling the price of a worker's time, or rather letting it settle itself by supply and demand. Unfortunately, supply and demand may produce undesirable results. A division in which one woman gets a shilling and another 3,000 shillings for an hour of work has no moral sense in it. It is just something that happens, and that ought not to happen. A child with an interesting face and pretty ways, and some talent for acting may, by working for the film, earn 100 times as much as its mother can earn by drudging at an ordinary trade. What is worse, a pretty girl can earn by vice far more than her plain sister can earn as an honest wife and mother. Besides, it is not so easy to measure the time spent on a piece of work as it seems at first. Paying a laborer twice as much for 2 hours' work as for one is as simple as twice one a two. But when you have to divide between an opera singer and a dresser, or an unskilled laborer and a doctor, you find that you cannot tell how much time you have to allow for. The dresser and the laborer are doing what any able-bodied person can do without long study or apprenticeship. The doctor has to spend 6 years in study and training, on top of a good general education, to qualify himself to do his work. He claims that 6 years of unpaid work are behind every minute of his attendance at your bedside. A skilled workman may claim in the same way that 7 years of apprenticeship are behind every stroke of his hammer. The opera singer has had to spend a long time learning her parts, even when, as sometimes happens, she has never learned to sing. Everybody acknowledges that this makes a difference, but nobody can measure exactly what the difference is, either in time or money. The same difficulty arises in attempting to compare the value of work of a clever woman with that of a stupid one. You may think that the work of the clever woman is worth more, but when you're asked how much more in pounds, shillings, and pence, you have to give it up and fall back on supply and demand, confessing the difference cannot be measured in money. In these examples, I have mixed up making things with doing services, but must now emphasize this distinction because thoughtless people are apt to think a brickmaker more of a producer than a clergyman. When a village carpenter makes a gate to keep cattle out of a field of wheat, he has something solid in his hand, which he can claim for his own until the farmer pays him for it. But when a village boy makes a noise to keep the birds off, he has nothing to show, though the noise is just as necessary as the gate. The postman does not make anything, he only delivers letters and parcels. The policeman does not make anything, and the soldier not only does not make things, he destroys them. The doctor makes pills sometimes, but that's not his real business, which is to tell you when you ought to take pills and what pills to take, unless indeed he has the good sense to tell you not to take them at all, and you have the good sense to believe him when he is giving you good advice instead of bad. The lawyer does not make anything substantial, nor the clergyman, nor the member of parliament, nor the domestic servant, though she sometimes breaks things, nor the queen or king, nor an actor. When their work is done, they have nothing in hand that can be weighed or measured, nothing that the maker can keep from others until she is paid for it. They are all in service. In domestic service like the housemaid, or in commercial service like the shop assistant, or in government service like the postman, or in state service like the king. And all of us who have full-size consciences consider ourselves in what some of us call the service of God. And then, besides beside the persons who make the substantial things, there must be persons to find out how they should be made. Beside the persons who do things, there must be persons who know how they should be done and decide when they should be done and how much they should be done. In simple village life, both the making or the doing and the thinking may be done by the same person when he's a blacksmith, carpenter, or builder, but in big cities and highly civilized countries, this is impossible. One set of people has to make and do, whilst another set of people thinks and decides what, when, how much, and by whom. Our villages would be improved by a little of this division of labor, for it is a great disadvantage in country life that a farmer is expected to do so many different things. He has not only to grow crops and raise stock, two separate arts to begin with, and difficult ones too, but to be a man of business, keeping complicated accounts and selling his crops and his cattle, which is a different sort of job, needing a different sort of man. And as if this were not enough, he has to keep his dwelling house as part of his business, so that he is expected to be a professional man, a man of business, and a sort of country gentleman all at once. And the consequence is the farming is all a muddle. The good farmer is poor because he is a bad man of business. The good man of business is poor because he is a bad farmer. And both of them are often bad husbands because their work is not separate from their home. And they bring all their worries into the house with them instead of locking them up in a city office and thinking no more about them until they go back there next morning. In a city business, one set of men does the manual work, another set keeps the accounts, another chooses the markets for buying and selling, and all of them leave their work behind them when they go home. The same trouble is found in a woman's housekeeping. She is expected to do too many different things. She may be a very good housekeeper and a very bad cook. In a French town, this would not matter because the whole family would take all the meals that require any serious cooking in the nearest restaurant. But in the country, the woman must do both the housekeeping and the cooking unless she can afford to keep a cook. She may be both a good housekeeper and a good cook, but be unable to manage children. And here again, if she cannot afford a capable nurse, she has to do the things she does badly along with the things she does well, and has her life muddled and spoiled accordingly. It is a mercy both to her and the children that the school, which is a bit of communism, takes them off her hands for most of the day. It is clear that the woman who is helped out by servants or by restaurants and schools has a much better chance in life than the woman who is expected to do three very different things at once. Perhaps the greatest social service that can be rendered by anybody to the country and to mankind is to bring up a family. But here again, because there's nothing to sell, there's a very general disposition to regard a married woman's work as no work at all, and to take it as a matter of course that she should not be paid for it. A man gets higher wages than a woman because he is supposed to have a family to support. Yet, if he spends the extra money in drink or betting, the woman has no remedy against him if she is married to him. But if she is his hired housekeeper, she can recover her wages at law. and the married man is in the same predicament. When his wife spends the housekeeping money in drink, he has no remedy, though he could have hired a housekeeper imprisoned for theft if she did the very same thing. Now, with these examples in mind, how can an intelligent woman settle what her time is worth in money compared to her husband's? Imagine her husband looking at it as a matter of business and saying, I can hire a housekeeper for so much, and a nursemaid for so much, and a cook for so much, and a pretty lady to keep company with for so much. And if I add up all this, the total will be what a wife is worth, but it is more than I can afford to pay. Imagine her hiring a husband by the hour, like a taxi cab. Yet the income of the country has to be divided up between husbands and wives just as it has between strangers. And as most of us are husbands and wives, any plan for dividing up that breaks down when it is applied to husbands and wives breaks in the middle and is no use. The old plan of giving the man everything and leaving the woman to get what she could out of him led to such abuses that it had to be altered by the Married Women's Property Acts, under which a rich woman with a poor husband can keep all her property to herself, whilst her husband is imprisoned for life for not paying her taxes. But as 9 families out of 10 have no property, they have to make the best of what the husband can earn at his trade. And here we have the strangest mothers. The wife getting nothing of her own, and the bigger children making a few shillings a week, and having the difference between it and a living wage made up by the father's wage, so that the people who are employing the children cheaply are really sweating the father, who is perhaps being sweated badly enough by his own employer. Of this, more later on. Try to straighten out this mother on the plan of giving the woman and the children and the men what they produce each by their own work, or what their time is worth in money to the country, and you will find the plan nonsensical and impossible. Nobody but a lunatic would attempt to put it into practice. To each what she deserves. The second plan we have to examine is that of giving to each person what she deserves. Many people, especially those who are comfortably off, think this is what happens at present, that the industrious and sober and thrifty are never in want, and that poverty is due to idleness, improvidence, drink, betting, dishonesty, and bad character generally. They can point to the fact that a laborer whose character is bad finds it more difficult to get employment than one whose character is good. That a farmer or country gentleman who gambles and bets heavily and mortgages his land to live wastefully and extravagantly is soon reduced to poverty, and that a man of business who is lazy, does not attend to it, becomes bankrupt. But this proves nothing but that you cannot eat your cake and have it too. It does not prove that your share of the cake was a fair one. It shows that certain vices and weaknesses make us poor, but it forgets that certain other vices make us rich. People who are hard, grasping, selfish, cruel, and always ready to take advantage of their neighbors become very rich if they are clever enough not to overreach themselves. On the other hand, people who are generous, public spirited, friendly, and not always thinking of the main chance stay poor when they're born poor unless they have extraordinary talent. Also, as things are today, some are born poor and others are born with silver spoons in their mouths. That is to say, they are divided into rich and poor before they are old enough to have any character at all. The notion that our present system distributes wealth according to merit, even roughly, may be dismissed at once as ridiculous. Everyone can see that it generally has the contrary effect. It makes a few idle people very rich and a great many hard-working people very poor. On this, intelligent lady, your first thought may be that if wealth is not distributed according to merit, it ought to be, and that we should at once set to work to alter our laws so that in future the good people shall be rich in proportion to their goodness, and the bad people poor in proportion to their badness. There are several objections to this, but the very first one settles the question for good and all. It is that the proposal is impossible. How are you going to measure anyone's merit in money? Choose any pair of human beings you like, male or female, and see whether you can decide how much each of them should have on her or his merit. If you live in the country, take the village blacksmith and the village clergyman, or the village washerwoman and the village schoolmistress to begin with. At present, the clergyman often gets less pay than the blacksmith. It is only in some villages he gets more. But never mind what they get at present. You are trying whether you can set up a new order of things in which each will get what he deserves. You need not fix a sum of money for them. All you have to do is to settle the proportion between them. Is the blacksmith to have as much as the clergyman? Or twice as much as the clergyman? Or half as much as the clergyman? Or how much more or less? It is no use saying that one ought to have more and the other less. You must be prepared to say exactly how much more or less in calculable proportion. Well, think it out. The clergyman has had a college education, but that is not any merit on his part. He owes it to his father, so you cannot allow him anything for that. But through it, he is able to read the New Testament in Greek, so that he can do something the blacksmith cannot do. On the other hand, the blacksmith can make a horseshoe, which the parson cannot. Parson? How many verses of the Greek Testament are worth one horseshoe? You have only to ask the silly question to see that nobody can answer it. Since measuring their merits is no use, why not try to measure their faults? Suppose the blacksmith swears a good deal and gets drunk occasionally. Everybody in the village knows this, but the parson has to keep his faults to himself. His wife knows them, but she will not tell you what they are if she knows that you intend to cut off some of his pay for them. You know that as he is only a mortal human being, he must have some faults, but you cannot find them out. However, suppose he has some faults that you can find out. Suppose he has what you call an unfortunate manner, that he is a hypocrite, that he is a snob, that he cares more for sport and fashionable society than for religion. Does that make him as bad as the blacksmith, or twice as bad, or twice and a quarter as bad, or only half as bad? In other words, if the blacksmith is to have a shilling, is the parson to have a shilling also? Or is he to have sixpence, or 5 pence and 1/3, or 2 shillings? Clearly, these are fool's questions. The moment they bring us down from moral generalities to business particulars, it becomes plain to every sensible person that no relation can be established between human qualities, good or bad, and sums of money, large or small. It may seem scandalous that a prize fighter for hitting another prize fighter so hard at Wembley that he fell down and could not rise within 10 seconds received the same sum that was paid to the Archbishop of Canterbury for acting as a primate of Church of England for 9 months. But none of those who cry out against the scandal can express any better in money the difference between the two. Not one of the persons who think that the prize fighter should get less than the Archbishop can say how much less. What the prize fighter got for his 6 or 7 minutes boxing would pay a judge's salary for 2 years. And we are all agreed that nothing could be more ridiculous than that any system of distributing wealth which leads to such absurdities must be wrong. But to suppose that it could be changed by any possible calculation, that an ounce of archbishop or 3 ounces of judge is worth a pound of prize fighter, would be sillier still. You can find out how many candles are worth a pound of butter in the market on any particular day. But when you try to estimate the worth of human souls, the utmost you can say is that they are all of equal value before the throne of God. And that will not help you in the least to settle how much money they should have. You must simply give it up and admit that distributing money according to merit is beyond mortal measurement and judgment.